Renewable Energy Summit. Today we have a panel featuring folks from the renewable energy industry to talk about the wave of utility scale renewable energy in Wisconsin. We've got Mariah, Lynne from Steward Consulting, Benjamin Lipari from Alliant Energy, Sterling Root from EDF Renewables, and I'm Andrew Kell. I'm a policy analyst with Renew Wisconsin. So we're just gonna have a welcome and overview, and then we'll dive into the topics at hand. So with that being said, I know Alliant Energy is sponsoring this panel for today. So Ben, you want to have some welcoming remarks?
I do, thanks. Seems like we're hot here. Great to see everyone out this afternoon. And I'm sure you guys are enjoying all the panels and the great content from the day. We're just extremely proud at Alliant Energy, not only for what we're doing in the industry, which we'll talk more about, but with all of our brethren utilities and partners and renewable developers in Wisconsin and throughout the Midwest. And also just want to thank Renew for their role in hosting a conference like this and bringing such a great network of people together.
Thanks, Ben. And just for an overview of what we plan to do today, I'm going to give an overview of the RPS and the current drive for renewable energy in the state of Wisconsin. And then I'll kick it over to our panelists. I think we're going to hold questions until the very end for the panel discussion. Also have to run a laptop that's running the slides right at 2:15 sharp. So we do have a hard cutoff at 2:15 for the day. That being said, as well, we're going to have people virtually and people in person live as well. This is really the only mics for in-person questions. It put some note cards there. So if you want to, as you think of your questions, write them down. Towards the end of the session, I can take those and read those off at the microphone. And online, I believe Mariah is going to be handling the WOVA app for some online questions as well. So a little backdrop. Most of you are familiar with the renewable portfolio standard in Wisconsin. It was a goal to achieve 10% of retail sales from renewable energy by 2015. That was first achieved in 2013, and it's been achieved ever since. In the PSC's RPS compliance assessment, over 8.75 million megawatt hours of renewable energy was generated to serve retail load in 2020, which serves about 13.5% of retail load in the state. As you note from the slide, the resources that serve load is primarily from out-of-state wind, although, of course, as we'll go over, there's a lot of in-state wind and, of course, baseline amount of hydroelectric generation and biomass resources as well. We'll talk about the trend towards solar, but historically, it's been at a lower investment in this state. Some examples of projects that drove RPS compliance. Again, there's a lot of large utility-owned resources, as you note, from Minnesota and Iowa, also resources in the state of Wisconsin as well, oftentimes developed by third-party developers and then purchased by utilities or developed through PPAs with the utilities as well. You see a range of all the way from 200 megawatts to under 70 megawatts for some of these large initial installations that are owned by utilities. And as with regards to PPAs, it can be mid to long-term PPAs from utilities purchasing from the third-party developers as well. A lot of these facilities were sited in Iowa, also some in Wisconsin as well. And I'm focusing more on the large scale. There's a lot of resources that are under 50 megawatts as well, but I'm focusing on the largest installations to date. And Quilt Block was developed, I think, maybe cited in 2017, I want to say. So it's one of the more recent ones, but these are all, I would say, historically speaking, a little earlier in service dates and driven more by RPS compliance. So that being said, the wave of utility scale renewables today, not necessarily driven by the RPS. The RPS has been met. So there are other factors as to why utilities and why developers and why retail customers are investing in renewable energy. Big reason why is the zero carbon goals. We all are familiar with Governor Evers' goal from Executive Order number 38 to achieve 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050 and draft a clean energy plan, which Maria Redmond talked about earlier this morning. And many are familiar as well. The largest investor-owned utilities in the state have goals to get to zero carbon by 2050. And besides these goals, again, as you're all familiar with, there are technological advancements as far as the efficiency of panels and equipment, and just the cost has come down dramatically. You're familiar with that trend of prices coming down to make it more economic for just a bit, making the business case for renewable energy, and particularly solar energy for the development today. So I'm just going to go on a large scale overview of what's been installed already, what's in the pike as far as what's already been authorized, and then some of the dockets that are currently before the commission. So in the last couple of years, we've seen several large-scale solar facilities that have been authorized and have been constructed and been in service in the last couple of years as well. So we've seen Two Creek Solar come online first. That was 150 megawatts. And we've seen the first phase of Badger Hollow, Point Beach Solar, and O'Brien Solar Fields, which Sterling will talk about later today as well. That's just when we start talking about utility scale, it can mean different things to different folks. I would say that's utility scale, but at the distribution level. A lot of times we're talking about at the transmission level, but it can mean at the distribution level as well. So these are some projects that have been authorized by, the commission, or received local siting authority from projects that are under 100 megawatts. So several of these projects have been authorized fully now and are being installed or under construction in Wisconsin. And also of note, we're focusing on solar, obviously, but Red Barn wind facility has been recently authorized by the commission. I haven't even seen the order posted yet, so that's been verbally accepted by the commission. That'll be a 91.6 megawatts wind facility in Grant County. And as we'll see from the map later on, a lot of these installations are in primarily southern Wisconsin. And not only that, but dockets before the commission right now, several of these are involving solar paired with battery energy storage. So we've seen, especially from Darien, Terrace Solar, and Koshkonong Solar, large battery systems that will be paired with solar to provide more consistent output of generation at the utility scale. And besides these ones with batteries, you've seen authorizations for Springfield, Apple River as well, and these are 100 megawatt facilities. So these are all very large scale solar facilities that have been authorized. I'm sorry, these are under review at the commission currently right now. Some of these are under the comment period, or they've been authorized at least through the application period and under review by PSC staff. Continuation of this, these are a little bit smaller facilities. These are all Alliant Energy, or WP&L as they're called locally here in Wisconsin. Albany, Beaver Dam, Cassville, Paddock, and Watoma, all 65, 50 megawatt. There's 99 megawatt as well. So these are all subject to local siting authority for environmental impact and siting. And because they'll be procured by a utility, they have to receive economic authorization by the commission as well, usually through a buy-sell docket. I believe these were CE dockets, but same concept. Essentially, the utility is procuring these resources, and Ben will be able to talk about these a little bit more in the future. So just to give a little bit of lay of the land, as I said, right now the map on the left is that which is being cited right now in some sort of development phase, authorized by the commission, in service, or almost through the process and very much along the development phase. The map on the right is a little bit more prospective, dealing with MISO-Q. Not all those projects may come to fruition, but they're at least being proposed by developers or by utilities in the state of Wisconsin. So again, we've seen the trend initially in southern Wisconsin, but as the prospect of future projects come online, we're moving up the state into central Wisconsin as well. So I want to leave you with a couple of quotes. Obviously, we're very busy. Anyone who's been in front of the Public Service Commission knows that the commission is very busy right now with all these projects and policy items. And one thing is good to take a step back, and we're doing a good thing. So it's good to stay busy. I was curious. I was going through quotes. I didn't realize Lucille Ball had made the quotes that want something done, ask a busy person. You probably have heard of that quote before, but just watched a movie recently, and apparently she was kind of a workaholic. So yeah, it's good to get things done and keep busy. And maybe familiar with the Shawshank Redemption, the book or the movie. If you're not busy living, I'm sorry, get busy living or get busy dying. So there's a couple things to think about. It's good to stay busy and keep the push for renewable energy going in the state. That being said, I will turn it over to Ben. And I'll give a little bit of overview as well for Ben. So Ben Lipari is the Director of Project Development and Customer Solutions for Alliant Energy, with a project portfolio in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. Ben leads a development team focused on partnerships with renewable developers and suppliers to develop, acquire, and construct renewable projects. Go ahead, Ben.
Great, thanks. I'm going to call an audible here right out of the gate. I'm going to come up there just so I can see the audience a little bit better here. All right. Well, again, glad everyone has an interest here in the topics we're going to discuss with you this afternoon. All of us are going to keep our remarks fairly brief. Mine may be a little bit lengthier as I'm going to expand on some of these topics that are contributing towards the growth in renewables. But then we're really interested in what is on everyone's mind. So we'll have plenty of time for some Q&A after the more prepared remarks. Clean energy blueprint. I love labels that you don't have to think too much about what it means. This is our path for our transition of our generation portfolio. It extends beyond just what we're doing from a generation standpoint. This is really touching all major strategic initiatives, not just for how we're changing and growing as a business, but for how we're trying to strengthen communities. You see there on the slide, we're being very purposeful about actions that are creating more affordability for our customers. These are initiatives that are focused on what we're hearing from them in terms of improving the environmental profile that we have as a company. And then these initiatives often tie in a very integrated way to broader community planning that's happening. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we make our way through the material. One of the big headlines, of course, has been doing a gigawatt plus here in Wisconsin. So we have two separate filings that comprise those 12 projects. We were thoughtful about advancing 12 projects. I see a lot of our developer partners here, so I want to recognize NextEra, National Grid, Ranger Power, and Savion, all developers that were instrumental in us bringing a number of these projects forward, and then our own Alliant team. We do our own self-development as well, and that's a way for us to get closer to the early stage conversations that are going on in these communities. So there's three pillars. There's, of course, other ancillary benefits as well to why solar energy and kind of the why now element of this. We think about it being a smart investment. This is around equipment costs reducing dramatically over the last number of years. Of course, there might be questions later around some of the volatility in the supply chain and kind of broader market conditions that have caused those prices to either be static or potentially increase a bit. And we welcome that discussion, but we see a commitment through the production of major equipment as well as the major OEMs to get back to price reductions after we see some of this volatility calm down. And it's not just about costs, it is also about performance. So the solar projects that would have been fixed tilt, monofacial 5 years ago are now single axis, bifacial, and we're seeing meaningful improvements in the performance of those facilities, which translate into meaningful benefits for our customers with additional kilowatt hours. The economic catalyst with these projects is meaningful. Speak with any of the local officials that were able to add to the tax basis. Talk to any of the small business owners that are either able to subcontract or receive the benefit of the construction of these projects. Talk to any of the larger corporates that are interested in siting new facilities and operations where they know that they have access to local renewable power. All of that is, very much contributing to what we see as kind of the onset here of a major renewable transition. And then, of course, the environmental attributes. This is what would have propped up renewables early. but is no longer the only pillar here to seeing a lot of growth in renewables, really in perpetuity. So I loved all of the project lists that were up earlier. A number of those projects, as you can see, look familiar to us. I mentioned we've got 12 active projects. We've got our construction team that's, turned dirt, putting in piles. We're now seeing panel supply pick back up again after a bit of a stall and through some of the supply chain last fall and over the winter. And you see this transition from project phases of where you have just kind of a small concentrated group of champions and advocates locally to now a very proud community that is seeing panels going up. They're starting to get some of the work involved in site grading and other elements of these projects. We're providing tours to schools and having connections with technical colleges for folks that want to enter this type of industry from a trade standpoint. So we're excited about all those opportunities. We're an open door as it relates to the communities and these types of interactions. And we believe that others that are building projects throughout Wisconsin have that same mindset. So I'll leave you there for prepared remarks and hand it over here for the next speaker.
Thanks so much. Quick by way of intro, my name is Sterling Root. I'm a Senior Manager of Business Development for EDF Renewables. Before I get started, wanted to thank Renew for having EDF here yet again. This is my 5th year coming to Renew Wisconsin. And I was admiring today that when I first came in 2017, I was advertising that we had built the largest project in the state of Wisconsin, and it was 3 megawatts in size. Today, there's community solar legislation that would set a cap at 5 megawatts in size. So we're talking about potentially creating programs that are larger than the largest project in the state literally 5 years ago. So the speed at which Wisconsin solar is growing has been crazy. I work on the solar side pretty much exclusively, so I'm going to focus primarily on that. Sorry, I won't be great at addressing your wind questions or biodiesel, but I'll try my best. For those of you who don't know, EDF Renewables is one of the largest wind and solar developers in the United States. We are owned by the French government, who owns about 85% of the nuclear power in the world. And we're very active all throughout the country. I focus my efforts on solar projects that are about 1 to 50 megawatts in size. Quick overview of some of our Wisconsin history is shown up here. You can review it on your own, but 2 projects with Madison Gas and Electric, one with Dairyland Power Cooperative, O'Brien Solar being the largest of those that came online recently. That project is for Madison Gas and Electric, and a large amount of C&I corporate clients have bought into it, one of them being the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I wanted to try to make this short so that we can answer most of your questions, but I guess I'll start by kind of giving an overview of where the national market is, and then I'll narrow in onto Wisconsin. So it's been a really interesting couple of years for solar. Last year, according to Wood Mackenzie, it was the first year in 7 years that the price of utility scale solar projects increased. A large driver of that was changes in the global supply chain brought on by COVID-19. Lots of issues getting shipments to the US, lacks of container ships, lots of factories shutting down overseas because of COVID restrictions. All of those things serve to draw out utility scale project timelines and increase the cost in a fairly considerable way. You also had, during the last federal administration, an implementation of tariffs on panels that are stepping down next month and will finally be going away if they don't decide to get re-extended. And you've also seen the investment tax credit, which is the primary funding source of renewables, step down. It's at 26% now, and will be stepping down to 22% next year. So all of those factors have come together to make prices increase. We're kind of projecting, similar to what you had just heard, them to stay about the same or start to recover in 2023 or so. But for now, for the first time, prices have gone up, which has been interesting, but we haven't seen procurement slow down. Other forms of energy have gotten more expensive, so that only serves to help move things along. Final thing I'll say, kind of on the national side, unfortunately, depending on your view, the portions of the Build Back Better plan that would have related to solar and renewables and really spurred things along have gotten pushed back. We'll see if those come back into play, but that could be a game changer that makes procurement speed up a lot more in the coming years. Focusing now more specifically on the Wisconsin market, there's been a couple of macro trends worth mentioning. One of them that I'm sure you're going to hear more of in the next presentation is that there's been increased opposition to some of these projects, particularly on the utility scale. I can speak to our project specifically and say that none of those 3 projects that got done had basically any opposition, if not 1 or 2 landowners that were maybe concerned about stormwater runoff. And now you're starting to see, because there's been such large penetration, a lot more public opposition, some folks starting to organize groups on Facebook, people going out of their communities to voice. It's new to Wisconsin, but it's not new to the industry. States that are a little bit more established have been seeing these types of trends for years. So I think it's a storm that can be weathered, and I think that it probably is going to require all the folks in this room, different developers and different groups starting to organize and find ways that we can combat some of that aggression and maybe counter organize. So I think everyone here is doing a good job. Just by being here, you're helping with that, but that is a trend we're starting to see in Wisconsin. 2 things that you've probably heard about mentioned in other presentations today are pending legislation for both community solar as well as potential third-party ownership. Both of those, despite this being a conversation on utility scale, probably wouldn't fall into the category or umbrella of utilities, because typically it's not a utility that's purchasing the power from it. But both of those are pending legislations that are worth mentioning, because they would increase solar penetration fairly significantly if they were to pass. There's still, as you just saw, a large amount of interest. I mean, and procurements coming down. The fact that there's 2.5 gigawatts in development or in service now speaks to how much more is going to be coming online in the near future. There's a number of green tariffs in place. So O'Brien Solar was part of what's called the Renewable Energy Rider program, where corporates were able to buy into shares. I think you're going to continue to see some additional projects that are kind of structured in that sense from utilities coming in the near future. And then finally, wanted to mention battery storage. You saw 250 megawatts of it are proposed now. It's coming to Wisconsin. It's already here. It's kind of the next wave of solar. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the next few years. That's kind of all the points I wanted to touch on, but I'm definitely going to take questions. The final thing I wanted to just say to, I've seen a lot of interns around here and things like that. I found my first job in this industry at a conference. Don't be afraid to go up and ask people for jobs. I'm happy to answer questions related to careers as well if you're young in college trying to break in. So feel free to come up to me on the side and don't be afraid. So just wanted to leave that with everybody, and I'll pass it off.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mariah Lynne. I am president and founder of Good Steward Consulting. Good Steward Consulting is a public outreach and communications firm located in Albert Lea, Minnesota. We have been working specifically with 100 megawatt and greater renewable energy projects, wind, solar, and battery storage exclusively since 2018. And when we were going through the slide deck, we were giving Ben a hard time for his number of slides, and we were talking about the entry number of slides. And I said, I'm okay with it because there's not a slide that's been shown that doesn't include a project we've worked on in the state of Wisconsin. So just thank you to everybody who's attending today, and for all of the people who are committed to helping Wisconsin meet that 2050 goal, because it is going to take all of us. A little bit more about GSC and who we are, what we do. I said we're located in Albert Lea, Minnesota. Does anybody know where that is? All right. I live in Heartland, Minnesota. Does anybody know where that is? It is by Albert Lea. Good job. I live in a town that has 318 people. I was married to a farmer for 10 years, and I actually watched the Bent Tree Wind Farm go up, which is Alliant's project. So I live on the edge of Bent Tree, and my children's father farms around those wind turbines. And I had the pleasure of delivering meals and parts on the wind turbine access roads before I entered this industry. And since I've entered the industry, we've actually grown to include providing services to 12 developers across 17 states. And in the state of Wisconsin, we're currently working with 5 development companies who have 150 megawatt or larger projects under development today. So I have the distinct pleasure of watching all of the different companies go about things in their different ways. And one thing is for sure, I have experienced and seen an increased interest and commitment to community engagement. And I think you've heard that in our, across a lot of sessions actually today, the fact that community opposition is real. And, Sterling just said it might be newer to Wisconsin, but it's not new to those of us who work in other states and have experience in those areas. And it is because of the penetration that's happening right now. That is all we do is public outreach and communication. We help with event planning, we help with community strategy, and we have local reps and local offices in the majority of our projects. So right now we have 20 local reps across 19 offices. We are fortunate that one of the local reps that we've worked with is here today, Stacy Kincaid. She is the local rep for Invenergy's Darien project, which has been very successful. So if you have an opportunity to talk to her, please do. And then our virtual attendees, Kim Griffin, who has served as the local rep for Wood County, which was developed by Savion and is an Alliant project now. She's available online in the virtual platform as well. And I would encourage you guys to talk with them. These are local folks who live in these project areas and who have watched successful developments, the do's and the don'ts, and they're great resources for you. So I would use them as resources today. I'm going to stop there because I know we only have a few more minutes and we can move it into the Q&A. Oh, well, it's just my face. So a pretty picture, boots on the ground, Good Steward Consulting.
I want to make sure you got props.
Yeah, right. You want to switch with me and I'll check the online ones?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to take some questions now, both online and in person. Like I said, I've got some Post-it note cards behind the projector there if you want to write down. Otherwise, you can raise your hand and I'll try to repeat verbatim so the folks online can hear. And then Mariah is going to go to our WOVA app and get the online questions as well. So that being said, I guess we can start in person. Does anyone have a question? Go ahead.
Hey, you talked about the public opposition. Are there kind of common themes of that opposition, or are they more very based on the
Good question. Do you want to repeat it or do you want me to repeat it? Are there,
Yeah, could you repeat? Is a mic hot?
is it
over there?
on? Okay. The question was, are there common themes across the opposition that we're seeing? Correct. Yeah, there are common themes across not just Wisconsin opposition, but all opposition to renewable energy developments, right? And the more you work in this industry, the more you get the honor to say I've heard it all. But the common themes, I believe, come down to misinformation, right? And it all boils down, in my opinion, to 2 things. Because we have symptoms and we have issues, right? So we can talk about symptoms all day and it will never solve an issue. Based on the interactions I've had with the participating landowners and communities and neighbors, I've really boiled it down to the fact that it's 2 issues. 1, people don't want to look at it. 2, economic jealousy. And everything else comes down to symptoms, right? These are their 2 main core issues, and they're using concerns about health and safety to posture the real issue, right? What's really at issue here? We have science and data and resources from very respected, institutions to show the safety, right? To show that there aren't major health concerns with this. We have sound studies, we've got standards, we've got all sorts of regulation that we have to follow in order to do projects at the size that we're doing projects at, to show the health and the safety are not a risk, right? But I think at the core, we have to be able to really identify that, in my opinion, and again, it's just my opinion, those are the two I've boiled it down to. Don't want to look at it. Economic jealousy. Now, progressive developers are doing things about both of those things, right? Visual screening, working with neighbors on placement of equipment, economic jealousy, including good neighbor agreements for neighbors so they can feel a part of the project, so they can feel compensated, right? So progressive developers are doing that, I believe. But that's my 2 cents. I don't want to.
I mean, I think that you pretty much summed it up perfectly. Most of the opposition that I've seen falls into one of those two buckets. And then you do have some amount in every state of people that just have a lot of free time and really deeply care about not seeing more solar that show up. So I would say that's probably the third bucket. But yeah, neighbors not wanting to look at it, or people wishing that the farm was located on their property and not their neighbor's property are typically the two most common oppositions that I see.
I'll just add, I guess, the industry is established enough now where you've got some best practices. So, you can do yourself a service and get there early and open up dialogue and listen, or you can expect that communities are going to receive you with open arms and roll the dice as to whether or not that will happen or not. So, I think speaking for those of us that are doing early stage development and ultimately want to see projects get built, we always wish we could start that conversation earlier. And I think we've all kind of learned through experience, and I've been impressed. We do business with developers that share our development philosophy, and I named a number of them earlier in my remarks. The industry is really kind of growing up in that regard, which I think we're all benefiting from.
I'll just add one final thing. A big just change is difficult and hard for everyone. And a lot of people just kind of want to have their fears and anxieties spoken to. What is this new technology? Is it going to be toxic? Will my kids be hurt? There always is going to be some amount of that level of fear. And I think, like you said, it's important to get there early and make sure that you're a voice and you're listening and honestly answering them and not dismissing those concerns at first glance.
Good question.
Yeah, I'll direct this to the EDF rep, since you have kind of a global perspective of what's going on. One of the pushbacks that we hear a lot is, where are the panels being manufactured and what's been the advances in recycling once the project's decommissioned, and, concerns along the panel line.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that affects your tariffs and all these other things you spoke of. So, I can think back to the old Carter administration days when they had the initial solar program where we had manufacturers right here in Caribou, Wisconsin, making, wind panel systems. It appears the industry here has a lot of that overseas in panel production. Has there been any movement to try to rein that into the United States and make it more localized and take away that barrier?
Yeah, great question. I'll repeat it. I think just to summarize it are there any efforts to bring more panel manufacturing to the domestic side and stop offshoring it as much, right? So the answer is yes, there have been lots of efforts in that front, but you're correct in pointing out that the majority of panels are manufactured overseas and not in the US. There's really only a couple of firms in the United States that are panel manufacturers. For solar is one of the more reputable ones. I'm probably going to forget some just off first glance. So absolutely true. During the Trump administration, there was an act called Section 230. It was actually the first tariff that was put in place by the Trump administration, where essentially the industry was claiming anti-competitive behavior, and a tariff got implemented on panels at 20% that stepped down 5% year over year. I believe that went into effect in 2018. There's some debate as to whether or not that ended up bringing anything back, but overall, I think within the last few years, you've seen a lot more concerns about domestic manufacturing just being raised generally in the United States. And you have seen a lot more of these companies start to make commitments in the US. I know there are plants that are coming to Ohio, plants that are going to, I want to say, Georgia as well, that's going to be focused on this. So it is an issue that the industry is starting to address. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much so.
Good question. Go ahead.
Yeah. I seen on the development pipeline map, there's a lot of projects in southwestern Wisconsin, especially like pretty much all the wind was down there. Cardinal Hickory line, that doesn't go through. Is that pretty much going to take a lot of that off the map? And you guys have to get involved, so to speak, and talk about PR, trying to help convince. There's a lot of, I guess, opposition to that. And just want to hear opinions on that topic.
You got Cardinal Hickory?
No.
Okay. I can speak to some of that. Cardinal Hickory, we wait and see. As we've been waiting and seeing for a little while, I'll speak to, I guess, the viability of the wind and other new resource options on Southwest Wisconsin. Southwest Wisconsin, probably obvious, that's where the wind resource is most optimal. So it starts there. Having the additional transmission only helps. I would suggest that there's opportunity for that wind and or other resources to still get advanced and constructed, even without Cardinal Hickory. There would be, restudies through the MISO process as it relates to potential additional upgrades to the grid, because those have been assuming Cardinal Hickory Creek at this point. So that's probably as much as I could get into it today without,
Maybe a delay,
a bunch of what ifs.
Might be a delay, but might not be a showstopper.
Agree. And I also think there's a likelihood that you wouldn't see as many projects built out near term if Cardinal Hickory doesn't come to fruition.
Maybe one more in person, we'll go to the WOBA app. Go ahead.
This would be a question for you. One of the bigger questions, more difficult questions I've seen in the public impact of property value. And is review involved in the issue of something to further data development on that front, looking at some more mature projects coming online.
Yeah, good question. So the question was relation to property values and projects impacts. Obviously, it's cited in many construction cases, has Renew been working to gather data and studies and such. Long story short, I don't know if we have any ready available fact sheets per se. It is a subject of, I heard in the Koshkanon hearing, there was a subject matter expert in real estate that submitted testimony. So there are definitely subject matter experts on a case-by-case basis that are developing the record for the commission to discuss about the impact to property values. Has been a big issue, but I do think that is something that we can work to start to understand as well, like you said, in other states that have maybe been a little bit more advanced in the development of solar and seeing what's going on there. And then the early stages in Wisconsin as well, starting to gather some data and get a better understanding of what's really going on.
It's worth noting there's also a number of peer-reviewed studies that touch on this, and SIA and other agencies have taken large steps to show that it doesn't have a large impact on property values. So if you talk to me after, I can get you some of those resources. Okay. Understood.
Thank you. And Maria, you have a couple questions?
Yeah, okay. So first question from our online attendees, and thank you for attending virtually. Are there companies in Wisconsin or Illinois active in agrivoltaics? If so, which companies are there? Thanks.
I'm going to assume that I take that one.
Yes.
To be honest, off the top of my head, I can't name any companies that are actively involved in it, but I can speak to agrivoltaics generally. So for those who don't know, agrivoltaics is essentially the idea that you can combine an agricultural practice with solar. So you have all of this land sitting there. Can we farm it? Can we utilize it? There's a lot of efforts trying to figure out how it can better be utilized for that purpose. Just to talk about some of the barriers of it. First and foremost, security ends up being one of the biggest risks that inherently comes up when you're talking to any utility company. You know, who's going to be farming it? Do we want to let them near all of this infrastructure? Do we want them to have access to any of our grid infrastructure? So first and foremost, that's a concern that needs to be mitigated for anything like this to work. Secondly, there's not that many crops that are capable of growing with limited sunlight in just the small areas in between rows. There's some ginseng has been thrown around as a potential solution because it's so because it's capable of growing in low light conditions. But I think that you're going to start to see it. I think it's just a matter of which companies want to step up and be the innovative ones, and which ones have partners in the utility sphere that have a comfort level where they're willing to allow, somebody to come in and lease the property and be active and not take the risk that the panels or anything will be damaged during the farming of it.
I will say too, a lot of the development companies that we've worked with in the state of Wisconsin, this has been top of mind for them, and they've made extreme progress in taking further steps to really make it something that moves from could we do this to how can we do this, right? And I know solar grazing is something that is increasingly becoming of high interest. And I know it's something that's been considered for Badger Solar. You're talking about a 300 megawatt site. But again, with the design and engineering, what you can do on a smaller scale versus what you can do and implement on a larger scale, there's a lot more complexity, right? But we are seeing developments look for portions of their ground where they can do meaningful agriculture in Wisconsin. And we've seen a lot of progress in other states with that as well. I know that there is a study that's being done in Indiana at one of the universities with regards to utility scale and growing watermelons, right? It's just making sure that you're taking a look at what the host agricultural lay of the land, pun intended, is and what you can accomplish there. But Sterling's right. These are power plants, right? It's a regulated power plant. And we all know that, we're aware of that. But I do continue to see innovation in the approaches that are being both researched and trialed, right? So we do see some of those trials taking place now too. I think it will be more prevalent in the future. Also look at where we are in the state of Wisconsin with the scale of these projects, right? So I think you have to progress a little bit further before you see full implementation of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that summarizes it pretty well. The final thing I'll say, just thought of it as you were seeing, I've seen a lot of bee habitats. Low growth pollinators have become basically a given in most states. I know that there was Wisconsin legislation that didn't have a lot of weight behind it, but was basically pushing it in that way. And a lot of Midwest states require low growth pollinators. I've seen a couple companies sprout up that specialize in locating bee hives on facilities. So
yeah, and I think the increase in all of these projects and the incorporation of pollinator habitat, if we want to call that agrivoltaics, that's definitely becoming mainstream. Yes. There is not a project that we're working on that has not either gone through the development stage with that as an assumption or seriously already made the commitment to it in the state of Wisconsin. So
I agree.
And some of the remarks are around, how the utilities feel about, these sites. So I've got an opinion on that. Yeah. We're very interested in seeing that evolve as well. They are generating facilities, but they're different. And, we're ready to evolve as our communities are looking for us to evolve as the landowners. This needs to be part of those initial landowner conversations. Bring them into the conversation. They've been farming and thinking about the best economics and production for their land for decades, if not generations. So we're excited about the prospects.
Thank you. I didn't want to speak for you. Make it. Okay.
Are there any other more app questions?
There are. There's actually several, and I apologize. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. One of the ones that was out here is, and I'll pose this to you others. Would you consider the MISO queue full right now for solar? And does that block future solar in Wisconsin?
Well, I would offer, tough to know when it's full, of course. There's a backlog. So for those of us that are active outside of Wisconsin, of which we're extremely active in Iowa, we've been active in Minnesota over the course of the last couple of decades. So we've seen these MISO issues kind of shift as the new generation has shifted through the Midwest. So what we're seeing now is a system here in Wisconsin that needs either additional transmission built or it needs to see some of the existing generation transition. So our approach here in the near term is to transition some of our generation. We've announced all of our coal that'll be coming offline by the end of 2025. That opens up capacity. That opens up the opportunity to repurpose existing infrastructure, to work in communities that we've had a presence. So that will be part of what I think you see happen. And then what you're also now seeing is you're seeing MISO being influenced by the other ISOs. So the projects that are trying to come up through Wisconsin, it's one thing to thread a needle and ensure there's the right type of capacity where you're trying to locate your project. It's another thing to also stay protected from not triggering upgrades on those other ISO systems. So just to offer, it's kind of multifaceted. It's not just a MISO specific concern. If the other footprints in MISO are any example of what will happen in Wisconsin, there will be no slowing down of the queue. Developers and utilities will continue to pump projects into the queue. And then as projects don't receive the economics that they're looking to receive in the MISO results, then they'll just sit on the project and bring it back at a time when they think it's more favorable based on other study activity.
Great. So maybe time for one more question in the audience. Maybe one. Okay, go ahead.
Are any of your efforts at Alliant and with the developers, are you able to incorporate any local investments into these projects such that people can have a long-term gain and return on their investment, not as a ratepayer, but as an actual investor, as opposed to just bringing out-of-state developers who most of the money leaves the state in that development. So.
Great.
Can I start
Please.
with that? This is something that we often get as a question, and I'm just going to recap it for the online audience. And is there an opportunity for local investment in these utility scale projects? You have out-of-state developers, sometimes you have out-of-state providers, and it feels from this person's point of view that a lot of that money is leaving. I'm going to preference the answers from these two with something that's near and dear to me. We do what we do for the local participating landowners in these projects. It hurts me at my core when somebody believes that this money is going to people from somewhere else. These are multi-generational farm families who are hosting equipment, receiving the ability to diversify their income for their farm operation. And I'm saying this from the point of view of somebody who's gone through it.
That's not true.
No, it is.
Not leaving the state.
I am saying a significant amount of the cost and a significant amount of the investment in these projects is staying local. I went through it. I live it every day next to the Bent Tree Wind Farm. What we receive locally is huge. Our cafe stayed open for 4 extra years because they put the wind farm up right next to us. Right? Our gas station is still open today and would have closed had they not developed and constructed that project in Heartland, Minnesota. Right? And I'm saying it so passionately because it is a part of my life and my community. And all too often people want to segregate that it's not making that local impact when every project we work in. I have sat across from hundreds of grown men with tears in their eyes when we get the approval. These landowners who have the weight of a century farm on their shoulders.
That's not the pot of money I'm talking about. I'm talking about the build upfront, the installation, and the investment money that's going in there and the return on that investment.
Sure.
I'm not, I mean, that.
No, I know. I know. I'm not being.
I'm sure you've got this, Mariah, that those same landowners say, can I invest?
Yeah.
And they cannot.
Right.
And that's the part I'm getting at.
Yeah. And I'm only prefacing their answer because all too often these two things get skewed. And I want to make sure
Okay.
that it's really clear on the fact that so much of this money does stay local, then we can talk about the other side of it, the investment side of it.
Okay, thank
I
you.
just want everybody to be clear on that.
Okay.
You know I love you.
I appreciate it.
So the project that I'd reference would be our first community solar project here in Wisconsin. So this is a project that we've financed, and essentially customers are participating, subscribing to the project, and then they will get bill credits over the life of the
Yeah,
project.
that's not quite what I'm getting at either, as you probably understand. Right?
Well, I would suggest that a project like that will spawn other projects like that. That'll spawn larger projects like that, which contribute to addressing,
Yeah.
I think, the concern you're bringing up.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. I would agree. I don't think it is either. As it relates to, it's a little different answer for the utility versus the developer, depending on how they set up and who's the offtake for the project. I know, when we bring our dozen projects forward and we talk about the savings over the life of these projects for our customers, we see that as a very real way for them to be participating in the project such that it enables stability on their bills. It doesn't touch on the investment element. That's certainly part of your question. So just some more thoughts as it relates to how these investments are staying and benefiting either local communities or certainly customers within the state.
And I'll try to add a little bit of context, maybe get at the answer I think you're looking for, and I'm going to try to do it without stepping on a landmine here. But and recognize that what I'm saying doesn't represent EDF and doesn't represent any of the utility opinions that are up here. But if you're talking about one of these projects, about 90% of the costs go into materials, staffing up locally, hiring locally, all local labor generally. I'm pretty sure any one of my competitors would tell you that they hire local whenever possible without sacrificing quality. Then there's about 10% that will go to the developer, give or take a few percentage points depending on it. That's about what the margin you would see on a solar project is, unless you're really lucky and are able to get it further. In terms of the economic returns, in Wisconsin, third-party ownership, quote unquote, is prohibited. So you cannot do power purchase agreements. But most of the utility projects, if you're working with an investor-owned utility, that utility will be seeing a return, and their return on investment does stay local. One thing that could allow for additional financing and financial returns of local banks or local financiers would be to open up third-party ownership laws and allow others to put it up. You could honestly debate whether or not that would end up happening, but it is a thought
So the owners of
worth
the
mentioning.
project are not getting PPA over time?
Sorry,
The owner of the project,
yeah.
are you saying because, so that you build it and then you always sell it to the utility? There's never a case where.
No, the C&I corporates will still purchase the projects.
Yeah, so they have a PPA with the utility, right? A long-term PPA?
Yeah, you'll sign some sort of a long-term offtake agreement with the utility.
So then the project owners are a set of investors and they're getting a return over time, 20 years, 30 years,
Mhm.
whatever the PPA is. Why can't that set of investors be local Wisconsin people versus very often investment banks? Or have you tried any? My question was, have you tried any?
Yeah,
models like that?
EDF has not tried anything like that to date. I'm happy to kind of talk through some of the constraints with you after. I think we have to.
Sure,
wrap
yeah,
up, but-
we're running over, and Commissioner
Thanks for the
Huebner is giving the
question.
keynote address in a few minutes. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Ben, Mariah, and Sterling for the panel for joining us today. I thought it was an excellent panel, excellent discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.